Mom doesn't like her ugly baby, so she secretly switches it. Then, this happens. Margaret had always imagined the moment her baby would be placed in her arms. She pictured soft skin, tiny fingers curling around hers, that warm rush of instant love. After 5 long years of fertility treatments, heartbreak, and quiet prayers, it was finally happening. She was going to be a mother. The hospital lights were too bright, the air too cold. Tom paced by the window while nurses rushed in and out. The labor had been rough, more painful than she expected, longer than the book said. When the final push came, she heard the cry and waited for joy to flood her body. But when they placed the baby on her chest, something inside her recoiled. The baby was crying, but his face, it didn't look right. His skin was red and cracked as if sunburned. His lips were swollen, almost peeling. Strange patches of long, dark hair matted across his scalp. His eyes were tightly shut, puffed at the corners. She didn't feel love. She felt something cold move up her spine. Tom leaned in and kissed her forehead. He looked down at the baby and smiled, saying how perfect he was, how proud he felt. Margaret nodded, but her arms barely held the child. The nurse gently lifted him and carried him to the warmer. Alone in the quiet, Margaret stared at the ceiling. She told herself it was the pain, the drugs, the exhaustion. She had read that not every mother connects right away, but this felt different. Her stomach turned every time she remembered the look of his skin. The image had burned itself into her mind. When the nurse returned, she asked if Margaret wanted the baby in her arms again. Margaret shook her head, said she was too tired. The nurse didn't push. She wheeled the baby back to the nursery. Margaret lay there in the dim room, surrounded by silence and shadows. She listened to the faint cries of other babies through the hallway walls. She closed her eyes and tried to picture her son. Not the one she'd just seen, but the one she had dreamed of for years. The one who never cried too loud. The one who looked just like the angel on her baby shower cake. Margaret moved slowly through the dim hallway, her hospital gown brushing against her ankles. It was the middle of the night. The floor was quiet, only a low hum of machines and the occasional beep from behind a closed door. Tom was asleep back in the room, breathing heavily in the pull-out chair. She had told him she needed to walk, stretch her legs, clear her head. Her feet led her to the nursery without her really thinking. The large glass window revealed rows of bassinets lined up like tiny cribs on wheels. Most of the babies were sleeping. One was fussing lightly, its little fists curled. Her eyes locked onto him. The nurse on duty was turned away, writing something on a clipboard. Margaret stepped closer to the door. She didn't blink. The baby in the second bassinet from the left had smooth skin, a little round face, fuzzy hair. He looked peaceful, healthy, normal. She reached for the door handle. It clicked softly. No one noticed. Inside, the air smelled like baby powder and sanitizer. Margaret walked to the bassinet where her baby had been placed earlier that day. She saw him, skin dry and red, eyelids still swollen. He was sleeping now. His chest rose and fell slowly. Her breath caught. She turned to the baby next to him, the one with the soft cheeks and pink skin. He stirred slightly, then settled. The nurse still hadn't turned around. Margaret leaned down and picked him up. He was heavier than she expected. Warm. She held him against her chest, adjusting his blanket with trembling fingers. Then, she gently laid her own baby where the other had been. She tucked the blanket tightly. Her heart pounded in her ears as she stepped back. The room tilted slightly, and for a moment she thought she might faint. But she didn't. She walked out the same way she came. Quiet. Careful. Back in the room, Tom stirred. She slipped into bed with the baby curled in her arms. He smiled when he opened his eyes, said the baby looked better already. Margaret nodded. She pulled the blanket higher and kissed the baby's forehead. Neither of them said anything more. At home, everything looked the way it was supposed to. The baby slept in his bassinet beside the window. The rocking chair creaked softly under Margaret as she moved back and forth. Friends dropped off casseroles. Neighbors sent flowers. Tom took photos of the baby every morning and texted them to family. But Margaret's chest stayed tight. At the first pediatric appointment, the nurse hesitated while reviewing the chart. She flipped through pages, looked back at the baby, then at Margaret. "This birth weight doesn't match the file," she said quietly. Margaret smiled stiffly. "Must be a typo." It was a long night. The doctor looked over the baby without much concern, but mentioned the wristband was missing. Margaret said it had slipped off at home. The doctor made a note. Later, in the parking lot, Margaret sat behind the wheel with the baby strapped into the back seat. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. She couldn't remember the drive home. That evening, Tom scrolled through his phone, pausing on a picture he'd taken at the hospital. The baby looked different somehow. Was his nose flatter before? Margaret didn't answer. The next morning, she left the TV on for background noise. Between commercials, a local news report caught her attention. A baby had been found left unattended in the staff nursery overnight. The mother couldn't be identified. The anchor's voice softened. The child had a rare skin condition. Doctors weren't sure how long he'd been alone. The baby had been transferred to a specialized unit. His condition was stable. Margaret's hand slipped, and her coffee cup shattered on the kitchen tile. She told Tom she'd cut herself, that the baby was hungry, that she needed a nap. He believed her. Days passed. Margaret began avoiding mirrors. She stayed up at night, rocking the baby long after he'd fallen asleep. She stopped answering calls. When Tom returned from work, she'd be sitting in the same spot, the blinds still drawn. Each time the baby cried, she felt a twist deep in her chest. Not from the sound, but from the way it always made her wonder what her real baby sounded like. The knock at the door came just after dinner. Tom was rinsing dishes, the baby dozing in the swing. Margaret opened the door to find two women standing on the porch, badges hanging from lanyards around their necks. They introduced themselves from Child Protective Services. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. They stepped inside politely but firmly, said they had a few questions. Something about a record discrepancy. Something about a security review at the hospital. Margaret's ears rang. Tom stood behind her now, a towel in his hand, confused. One of the women glanced at the baby, still sleeping. She asked to confirm the baby's hospital bracelet. Margaret swallowed hard, said she didn't have it anymore. The woman nodded slowly. They asked for photos from the birth, medical documents, anything from the day the baby came home. Margaret fumbled through a drawer, pulling out papers, trying to keep her hands steady. Tom kept asking what was going on. Margaret didn't answer. Then the woman said it plainly. There was video footage from the nursery. A baby was moved from one crib to another, just after midnight. Margaret sat down. She didn't deny it. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. She said she thought there'd been a mistake, that the baby hadn't looked right, that she panicked. Tom stared at her, the towel still clenched in his fist. "You did what?" He backed away slowly, like he didn't recognize her. The baby stirred in the swing and began to cry. Margaret didn't move. Later that evening, she was taken in for a formal interview. She told the truth. Every detail. No excuses. No explanations. They asked if she knew the other baby's mother. She didn't. But a few days later, they arranged a meeting. The woman's name was Danielle. She looked young, tired. Her eyes were red. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She just asked one question. Why? Margaret looked at her hands, then at the floor. "I didn't think I could love him," she said. "I was afraid." Danielle didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. So was I. Margaret sat in a small room at the hospital, across from a woman in a white coat. A doctor. Not one she'd seen before. The woman held a tablet and spoke gently, like someone explaining a storm after the wind had already passed. She told Margaret the baby she had given birth to, her biological son, had a rare skin condition. Harlequin ichthyosis. It sounded like something out of a textbook. The symptoms at birth were severe: dry, cracked skin, puffiness, redness. Frightening to see, but not fatal. The doctor said he had responded better than anyone expected. With gentle treatments, the skin had softened. Moisture returned. His breathing improved. And now, he was thriving. Margaret asked to see a photo. The doctor turned the tablet toward her. There he was, lying on a soft white blanket. His cheeks were round now, his skin pink and smooth, his tiny lips curved in something close to a smile. Her breath caught in her throat. That wasn't the baby she'd seen in the hospital. That wasn't the child she had turned away from. But it was the same child, just healed. She closed her eyes and wept. A week later, she saw him in person, through the observation window of the foster unit. A nurse lifted him into her arms, and he looked toward the glass as if he knew someone was watching. He didn't cry. Margaret didn't speak. Her hand pressed against the glass. The weeks that followed moved slowly. Visits. Supervised at first. Then longer. She sat with him, read books out loud, learned how to bathe him with special cloths. She held him tighter each time. Tom returned eventually. Not to forgive her. Not yet. But to see the boy. He stayed for longer than he said he would. On the baby's first birthday, the caseworker handed Margaret a set of final papers. Custody reinstated. Conditions met. Her son giggled in the stroller beside her, reaching for the balloon tied to the handle. His skin was soft now, his eyes bright. Later, in the quiet of his room, Margaret rocked him in her arms. She still had guilt, but it no longer lived in her hands. It had turned into something else. A vow.